Anyhow, just before we jump into the PowerShell part, I just want to, this one just finished up maybe 5 minutes ago here. Frank is logged in, and if I go to all applications here and scroll down a little bit, here you can see that Notepad++, I can click somewhere here. Okay, thank you. Notepad++ is indeed installed, and also further down in the list, zoom out again. Zoom out again. We should see WinMerge as well. Yeah, here's WinMerge. So those were the applications I had as required, and they are all installed, and the machine is now fully enrolled and managed through Intune. I need to implement some third-party patching here because there was an update available. Saw that right away. Anyhow, so that was the autopilot part. The next session is about using PowerShell to operate and troubleshoot ConfigMgr environments. But all these things that I will demonstrate in this session is equally applicable for other type of platforms as well. It's more like using a scripted approach to gather data and things that can help us troubleshoot stuff. So, still go on, still have questions. If you have any, don't hesitate to ask. I have 3 pillars we'll be focusing on. Do things simple, and you will have less to troubleshoot. There are good documentation platforms that you can run these days. You can actually have a live documentation of your entire ConfigMgr environment and Intune environment. So you don't have to keep a Word document updated all the time. You run the script, you walk away in 10 minutes, you're happy with the documentation. And we also use that to transfer things between lab setups, ConfigMgr and Intune to production environments. And I will show you some examples of that as well. Because I really, one thing that I was hoping that you would remember from this day, it would be that having access to a lab environment is absolutely key. It's been instrumental through my entire career, since early days until now, that playing around and learning and doing things hands-on, it's outstanding way to learn. And production is not always the best platform to do that. There's a very famous ConfigMgr meme or saying, however you want to put it, that everyone has a test environment. And a few lucky ones also have a production. So I've seen so many interesting things happening in ConfigMgr environments just because there was no lab available. So they decided to test in production. And that is not entirely ideal. For example, it works perfectly well to take a Windows 10 or Windows 11 image and deploy it to 1,200 servers. Beautiful technical solution, but it has a bit of downtime as a consequence. Usually stops when the ConfigMgr server itself gets pre-imaged, but then there's no more deployments. Anyhow, lab environment, highly recommended. Shameless plug, but it is for the community, so I'm not too embarrassed about it. But up on our academy, we do free mini courses every month. Did one with Niehaus earlier this year about Windows 7 setup internals. But we have one that we run at least twice every year. There is an hour-and-a-half session on building a lab for ConfigMgr and Intune. So the price is right. Simply sign up for it. And then there is an hour-and-a-half session about getting this going, figure out what hardware you need, and figure out how to do networking, and at least set on some basic that you can play around and test with.
Johan, can I add a plug?
Sorry?
I'm going to add a plug too for this.
Okay.
So when I was running the ConfigMgr engineering team at Microsoft, and we hired a bunch of people as we had to train the people who were going to write the code for ConfigMan, how ConfigMan worked. I called up Johan on the phone and said, can you run a training program for me for the new ConfigMan engineers? I didn't tell him it was a time zone not friendly to his time zone, but this is how I highly think of this training content is it's a training content I use to train ConfigMan code engineers that we're going to write the code.
I may or may not, David, have stolen that.
Oh, good. You put this one. Nice.
I could use it. Well, thank you, David. Appreciate it. No, that was a fun training. 20 brand new engineers, ConfigMgr. We started up at 10:30 p.m., ended up 5:30 a.m. for a week. It was rough, but we had good fun. But yeah, that course I highly recommend it. If you don't have any plans for the evening, invite family, friends, kids will love it. It's a good show. Perfect lab. And you can get away of basically getting a 5-year-old, Optiplex, 7040, 7050, whatever. You can get them on eBay for about $250. You add in, oops, that was another. You put in a SSD, put in some memory, and you have a lab machine fully capable of running ConfigMan environment, a bunch of VMs, so you can do Intune enrollment and testing and autopilot and that good stuff. And I bet you that most of you will have access to that kind of hardware in your environment. It's not too hard to ask for an older desktop or laptop that you can use for a lab. It doesn't need to be more. The key to all this success, put in at least 32 gigs of memory, put in at least terabyte NVMe disks, and don't go cheap on this because that will done that, tried it, did not work. There was a sale 2 years ago, Crucial had a sale, half price on all terabyte NVMe SSDs. I told my manager to buy 15, he did. Our deployment time went from 20 minutes to 3 hours because these have so small write cache in them. They didn't say that on their spec. But I learned that after being 3 hours with their support and finally getting to level 3 engineering, and then the engineer goes, oh, so you're running VMs. Yeah, no. Yes, we did. So we went back to Samsung, paid a little bit more, worked a little bit better, and yeah.
So a secret on that, if you watch every once in a while, there's NVMEs that are certified to work in PlayStation 5s. And they have really good heat sinks, and they have really, really good RAID speeds, and they're like $100 per terabyte. So watch for those on Amazon, and you'll get a good lab setup.
Yeah, awesome. So that's something I highly recommend. Get something going. Doesn't have to be super fancy, but have one is absolutely key. Now, back to a little bit of design and things in ConfigMgr. Just because you can have 100 distribution points doesn't necessarily mean you should have it. I work with a few organizations. This one just left the building, but long story short, if you have a distributed environment, and I'm going to open up my favorite tool, Paint, and it's quite a bit difference to deal with 5 DPs versus 500 DPs. I will give you a great example. One organizations I work with, they have about 47,000 clients, so not super big, but not very small either, so somewhere in between. Let me get the font a little bit bigger. Good Lord. They have 19 DPs, and they're global. And it's not like they have 19 DPs in 19 different countries. They are in 4 data centers. One in North America, one in APAC, one in Russia, and one in Europe. but they're clumped together there. They're just organized there. Another organization I work with, they have a few more clients. They have an 11 DPs. And there is another organization that I don't work with them, but I talk to their admin quite a bit. They have close or shy of 600,000 clients and 2,200 DPs. That's a lot of distribution points. And not just to upgrade, but to making sure content is distributed and all that stuff. Sure, you can control that with PowerShell, but it's simply a lot of things to do. So by keeping your infrastructure simple, you can, it's less work for you guys. So, long story short, I'll just leave that one. Whatever you can do to reduce the number of ConfigMgr servers. If you are 10,000 people or 10,000 devices users, you rarely need more than 3-4 site systems in that environment these days. A single management point will happily support 25,000 users. A single distribution point will happily support 4 officially, but if you enable just a tiny bit of peer-to-peer, you will find that that distribution point can scale much more because the clients are not really downloading from it. They're asking it for a package and asking for permissions to use the package, but we will grab the content from a local friend if there is a local friend available. So obviously those design limitations in the ConfigMgr for a distribution point, they were designed for the scenario where every client is actually using them, not for a peer-to-peer scenario. And supported also typically means tested up to a certain level. Anyhow, when looking at troubleshooting or operations of a ConfigMgr environment, you will learn pretty quickly that there are things that you do on a pretty much daily basis, stuff you do every week, and stuff you do every month, and stuff you do more planning-wise, planning for the next upgrade, putting in service or change requests. So that's actually became easier lately. I think it was just a few weeks back, Microsoft announced that they are, like they did with Windows, they are lowering the cadence for ConfigMgr as well. So it used to be updates 3 times a year. You all know that because it's been like that for a while. Now it's only twice. So it gives the team a little bit more time to add in stuff and also to put a little bit less burden on you guys to keep the systems updated. So I think it makes sense. I think we can all agree on that the initial cadence, maybe not for ConfigMgr, but at least for Windows, was a little bit tough. A lot of organizations did not upgrade 2 times per year. They waited a year and a half, even longer. But me and Jordan, who I think, yes, there it is. We were working with a customer in Germany a few years back, and we came up with what we call a little practical handbook, or how do you say it? I can spell practical. Where we started to define things that we realized, okay, for this environment, it made sense to do the following things. And the idea is obviously here is for each of these items that we listed here, use some sort of automation around it. So when we say that, verify that the last backup was successful, don't necessarily mean log into your backup portal and then check your email. It should be some sort of notification. Same things, checking free disk space. If there is one thing that makes ConfigMgr not happy, it is running out of disk space on either your content library or your SQL volumes or both. Not happy.
Not that that's ever happened to me.
It does. Anyhow, and so basically for each and all of these, there are things you can do in PowerShell very easily to make sure stuff are happening the way they're supposed to. And it could be simple things like this one down here. After 20-some years with ConfigMgr, this still happens. Well, not necessarily back in all those days because IIS was not used as much back in the days, but These days it is. And they the web server log files, they can grow pretty quickly, especially if something bad happens. They can go pretty quickly. Record so far is 50 gig in a day. So that was a bad distribution point. You rarely see it above 1-2 gigs a day. But where is the location by default for these log files? If you don't change it,
C drive.
C drive. How many ConfigMgr admins usually change it?
Not many.
Maybe 1 out of 52. The other 51, they leave it in the default location.
How many server admins provision the drive with only 60 gigs of usable storage?
Exactly.
One thing I found that was super helpful is someone made a config item that will clean out the IIS logs on a server. So if you Google like SCCM configuration item IIS log cleanup, you'll find something, and I have that running on every single server that has IIS and ConfigMgr for me. And it saved, we used to get tons of issues with logs filling, and now it's gone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you search for a bit of housekeeping on my blog, you will find that particular baseline.
Yes. I probably stole it from your blog.
Well, I stole it in turn after asking, so. He did some changes to it, make it a bit better. But it could be as simple as something like this. It can be a scheduled task that looks for certain paths for log files. If it finds them and they're older than, in this case, a month, it deletes them and makes a note that I deleted the following files. And then you just install that with the scheduled task command in Windows. So if you have ConfigMgr agents everywhere on all your web servers, baselines is a great idea, configuration baselines. If you don't, a bit of PowerShell never hurts. So, for example, and I remember showing this 2 years ago, the first time I think, but in this environment here, I have a here. This is one of my ConfigMgr labs, has 3 distribution points. So if I go to my site server for that environment and head over to a little bit of health check, this one here. And I'll get to show you the download link in a bit here, but this is a PowerShell script that copies out another PowerShell script to every distribution point, run it locally for a bit to get some data points from that server, sends the result back to me and summarizes that in a new report or in a report. And you can do this if you have 3 DPs, if you have 500. Usually you don't have 500, but it's a very simple way to get data point that you can review. And my favorite tool for that is Excel. Clients as well. It's so easy to just open up that spreadsheet and start to see trends very easily. You can drill down into that information, maybe use pivot in Excel if you like that one. But shorthand story, it's a PowerShell script that reaches out into my site server. And the first thing it does, it enumerates and say, you know what, give me a list of your distribution points. All right, fine. So now I have a list of my distribution points. And then there is a simple loop in the bottom, copy out a file, run it, return the result back to me, and life is good. So I'm going to run this one. The rest of it I should run. So copies out the script, running the script, and then it waits about 10 seconds. This is looking for something that does not exist. I need to add a control for that, I see. With magic 10 seconds, I have a report on my distribution point. And the thing I'm particularly interested in is stuff that I cannot find easily in the config manager monitoring. Because there's a lot of things that you can read here about the distribution points as well, in terms of deployment status and other things, but often I want to look at other data. So if I go to that particular report that was just created for me, this one here, sort by date, you can see we have a summary here from April 21st. I'm going to copy that over to a machine where I actually have Excel. Maybe not the Wim folder, but here, good stuff. So I open that report in Excel. Format the fields just a little bit here. Zoom in a bit. But I can see, okay, when were they updated last time? February, maybe not so good. April now. Is LED button enabled on all of them? Is critical services running that I won't necessarily see in Config Manager? We do tons of peer-to-peer with branch cache. Doesn't work too well if the branch cache service is not running on the distribution points. So I want to know whether it is running or not running. And I can easily filter on that. In Excel, I can, you know what, just put a filter, and if you have 100 of them, just show me every one that is either not set to automatic or either not running, whatever that might be that you want to look for. I just found Excel a fantastic tool to make sure that things are the way they're supposed to be, because it's easier when you have them side by side, in my opinion. So in this case, I'm making sure they have been configured for about the same cache size, because branch cache needs that. I'm making sure that the publication cache is not on the C drive on these servers. I'm making sure that the server secret, the encryption key for branch cache is the same on all servers. It's readable through the registry, but otherwise you will find that one client can access the content depending on which DP it connects. It has to be the same, and Config Manager synchronizes this across all distribution points to make sure that is the case. But if someone enables branch cache manually on a DP, not through the console, but add features in Windows, it will not have that right key and branch cache will break. Other things I'm looking for is, for example, this one. Where do I have my IIS log files? And in this particular case, I'm also querying the event log. Have there been any specific events the last 2 days or the last week related to, in this case, branch cache? I'm looking for how many log files I have. I'm checking out some other things, network information, memory, and whatnot. I'm checking free disk space, both on the system and on the volume or volumes, having my content library. And finally, I'm checking for some connected cache information for those organizations that are using connected cache servers. But this is more an idea. Finding data that makes sense for you guys to collect that and visualize it somehow. Can be Power BI, can be whatever, but sometimes Excel goes a long way, keeping it simple. I do the same thing for clients. Here's a client report with very similar metrics. The only difference there is that I don't want to run it with remote PowerShell, because I risk to miss every client that is not online. My distribution points I expect to be available at all time, and if I get an error running my invoke script that copies out the script, I know I have a DP that is down, and I need to fix that first. But clients, I prefer not to have config manager to deal with. I don't want the config manager agent through a baseline running my script. Why is that? Because I want to know why the config manager agent is broken. If it's broken, it won't tell me. It won't run the script. So we usually use simple things like a scheduled task deployed either through Intune or for Active Directory on devices that runs on their own every day. that summarizes data points that make sense and send them up to, again, an Excel spreadsheet. And on clients, I'm looking for other things. In this case, I have a parameter where I'm looking for the script version. And when I do my combination of the results, I'm only looking for a specific version of the script. But in this case, I'm also checking for a few different services. I'm checking for things that I've learned and change things on the client. If I'm troubleshooting something, it could be, you know what? Show me all that are wired or wireless or VPN if I have any VPN clients, so I can summarize and filter on those alone. Show me everyone that has a specific OS version. You want to look at your Windows 11, just look at Windows 11, and you see only those. Check for ConfigMgr client versions. Supposed to be the same, maybe they're not, and you can easily filter on those. This one I found particularly useful. Which distribution point did you use the last time, and what boundary group do you think you are in? We found a client in Argentina using distribution points over in Europe. I had distribution points on that continent, but they didn't use them because the boundaries was misconfigured. But when you see it like this in a list, it's so easy to see like, oh, wait a minute. These clients are beginning with the AR for all Argentina clients. Why are they using the wrong DPs? Well, you messed up the boundaries, fix them, and the problem goes away. And speaking of simple and boundaries, I have a very, very strong opinion about boundaries. So sorry, James, if I step on any toes here, but I like simple. I like simple a lot. And simple for me is IP address ranges. They will never lie to you, ever. Either an IP address is within that range or it is not. There is no maybe. Maybe the Active Directory team set up the site correctly in Active Directory and hopefully added the right subnet to it. Then they did a change and they didn't tell me. This is the source of truth. Works beautiful. And I came out to one customer. They had 5,087 of them. 4 distribution points. And what do you use boundary groups again for? Or boundaries and boundary groups? So that the client can find stuff, right?
They're not that important.
In theory, that customer could have used 4. But they had some overall boundaries on VPN networks, so we negotiated, agreed on 7. Still less than 5,000. Keeping it simple goes long. Yes, Gordon?
Did they fix the performance from
Yes.
what? Yes.
You knew exactly what I was gonna ask about the going through every single IP in the range question.
Kim stepped out.
No.
Back
Back in the early days,
the early, no, those were the middle days.
Those were,
We're still in current range, guys. I remember it.
I think it was fixed in 2012.
okay.
once upon a time, there were performance differences depending on which type you use for boundaries. These days, I don't think you can measure it. It's the same.
Okay.
So
I want to say it was there still in 1606.
No, it's fixed, I think it's fixed in 2012.
Okay.
long story short, use this and it will make your life a little bit easier in terms of boundaries because they will tell you the truth. Anyhow, back to Excel.
Sorry, the company that had 2,200 DPs, does that mean they have to at least 2,200 boundaries?
Not necessarily. You use boundaries to define the boundary group.
Right.
The boundary group can have many resources in it.
Okay.
So if you have a large location, say here is in the Seattle area, you may have 4 DPs. Put them in the same boundary group if they're somewhat well connected at least. And then you only have one boundary for the clients to use them. And they're going to round robin nicely. So if you have 4 DPs in the same boundary group, you know, have 10,000 clients using them, and you're monitoring the traffic, and that's actually a quite, not many people know about it, but it's been available for a long time. What's the name of it? DP usage, something like that. You can get this in PowerShell as well, but here. Distribution point usage summary. So we pick a DP. And a start date and an end date. And it will tell you how much it was used every day. And if you have 4 DPs that have about the same client coverage, they should be very similar. One exception, if you start to use connected cache servers, so you have an array of 4 connected cache servers, guess which one the clients are always using?
First one?
First one and only the first one. If you only go to the second one and the first one dies.
That's MCC, Johan?
Yes, sir. Okay. So.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, but it's not too hard. Our company that I work part-time for 2 clients, we have an agent that we deploy, and that one can round robin the connected cache servers. But by default, ConfigMgr, it will set a registry key on the client that is going to use that connected cache period. It's going to set the full array, but it's only going to use the first one.
Yeah, back to your model of like 4 DPs in one boundary group. I don't know if people know this. There's actually invisible boundaries that exist. So even if they're all in the same boundary, clients will always go to the closest one that they think exists on the network infrastructure before falling back to the boundary group. So even within a boundary group, there's some prioritization and intelligence about what DP to use.
Yeah,
You can't control that. You can't set it other than putting DPs in the same subnet as clients. They'll always use that first if they can.
I mean, to your point, a lot of our customers, they put all the DPs in the same region and the same VLAN just for that purpose. But Jason, I believe, wrote a nice blog post about the order of things, how clients were evaluating.
Sandy's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Anyhow. Thank you. Tell us some stuff for our agent, but you can see this as something that you have in your environment that is unique for your environment. So this is our agent configuration. Supposed to be the same everywhere, but clearly isn't. Allowing me to quickly find machines that are drifting in their configuration by simply, okay, why are you using this server? You're supposed to use that server. So just give me all machines that are using that server, and I can filter down and find out why they have that configuration. It could be other things. Looking for app crashes of certain types. Looking for grouping for delivery optimization. This is a big one. I've seen networks literally die because a clever administrator did not know how this worked. You will be surprised how much data Windows is actually downloading on its own every day. If I would go to one of my test clients, this is a fairly old client, and open up a touch of Powershell, and I'm asking the client how many files you have downloaded since you started. About 60,000 or 56. It's a lot of files. Times 10,000 clients. More files. They're being downloaded from internet by default. The default setting even today in Windows is for every one of these 56,000 files, the client will ask one of Microsoft Update Service and say, hey, so I have a file, I need this, do you have it? So there is a connection going up. And that service may very well say, yeah, here's the file, go download it. Or it can tell the client, you know what, you have a friend next to you that have it. Grab it from your friend instead. But there was still a connection. So this is data that I got, well, I asked for it, but I got it from one of our customers. And I found it quite interesting. This is their daily traffic. The ones down here is their combined ConfigMgr traffic. This one up here is Windows being Windows, doing nothing and just being Windows. You don't deploy any Intune apps to it, you don't any deploy any store apps to it. It's just the native components updating themselves in the background. And they do this several times per week. In the background, you don't see it, you don't notice it until you actually look for it. But look at the metrics here. Gigabyte and 4 digits. It's not good. They have almost 5 times the traffic from Windows than all ConfigMgr traffic combined. And by default, Windows is not very good in reducing that traffic. But just by enabling some policies, you can reduce this to up to 60-80% or 60-80%. And in later version of Windows 10 and Windows 11, you can tell the client for smaller stuff, don't even make that connection. Just ask around the local network if anyone has it. You don't have to go through the external firewall out to Microsoft to ask for a file that is 2 megabytes in size. And that's settings that you can configure in your policies. So a little while back, I published some recommendations. Here. In the bottom of this post, these are recommended settings for Windows 10 and Windows 11 that, if you define them, will reduce the WAN link with from the default 10 to 20% up to 60 to 80% by just configuring some policies. Not too terribly complicated. The trick is to group them right. If you don't know your network well, there is a trick. I go to the policy editor on one of my clients. Go down here. And there's, of course, equivalent Intune policies for those of you using Intune for that. Here. There's a special one. A filter you can set in your policies. And if you set it to subnet, it means that clients will only get content from friends on the same subnet. Might not be the most effective way, but it's a safeguard. Because I got a call 2 years ago from a customer in a bit of a panic. The idea behind anything that you do on networking side, the idea is that you put clients that are well connected to each other into the same group. And you put other clients that are well connected to each other in a different group. It's the concept of peer-to-peer. This organization tried something differently. They did not have a lab. They put the group around everything they had. 15,000 clients, about 500 subnets, allowing every client to talk to every client everywhere. That did not go well. And that network just died. Importance of having a lab, so you can play around and learn with things like this. It was so bad they couldn't place orders in their stores. It was a retail company. Management was not super excited about that. And it's apparently a big deal if you're a retail company to sell things. So. It's like going to Starbucks. Yes, we have coffee, but you can't buy it. But, okay. So anyhow, back to the troubleshooting part. Simple PowerShell scripts that you can run to gather information that allow you to see things that you might not otherwise see clearly organized together. This is a big one, bigger than you might think. Why should I bother about the number of files in the temp files folder?
Hard drives aren't unlimited.
Well, it's not so much disk space, it's more that over the years, the ConfigMgr client sometimes get a little bit upset about that. Fails to compile its MOF files, and there will be no upgrades of the client. That was a long-standing bug. I think it's fixed now, but if you have 75,000 files or more, it could not compile those files. My record from a client in China is 1.3 million files. I did not dare to even remote into that machine. I looked at that differently. But here's another one. I'm looking for framework version, because for us it's important that every machine has version 4.8. One of the components requires it, and without it, it's going to fail. And I bet you guys that you have many stuff like this that you can measure that makes sense to you guys. So all of these are available for download from a GitHub. Same folder as I showed you earlier, GitHub.com deployment research. And you can simply copy and paste and use what you like. I have a blog post that defines the concept. I call that something clever. Health, maybe. Yeah, this one here gives you a few examples, gives you instructions on how to implement it. This is just a simple collector, like 10 things maybe. In the examples I have up on my GitHub, there you have 50. And again, a little combination script that summarizes into a report. So, feel free to use it as much as you want. It's a good starting point. Other things I use a lot is I'm combining SQL and PowerShell to find things in my ConfigMgr environments. Because it turned out to be easier, at least for me, to do summarization options and grouping, etc., through PowerShell logic than to have the same logic in SQL. Or, for example, I'm using SQL to get a list of IP addresses. I found it easier to PowerShell to validate that they are an IPv4 address or IPv6 address, or they belong to the same subnet, they belong in the range they're supposed to be, even though it's technically possible to do a select string in SQL that is like 14 lines long. I just found it easier to do that in script. So you can have things like this. So I open up SQL Server Management Studio. We open a script of sorts. So I have available here I can borrow. get past sequence deployment time. I have stolen this from Jordan, thinking of it. He wrote a dashboard a while back, Power BI, deployment times, your OSP dashboard.
I remember that.
Yeah. But bottom line, this is a SQL script that obviously if I run it, it gets information from ConfigMgr. And in this case, it reports deployment times for different sequences. But I don't necessarily want to use this data here. I want to use it in PowerShell. So I will take the same concept. See if I have that one here somewhere. Get sequence deployment time. So PowerShell script, same query. In this case, I've added some more filters to it. I'm only checking the last month. I'm only selecting for a specific sequence, not all of them. But here's my SQL query right here. And then I run that query through PowerShell. So basically, after running this, the top section of the script, I will have a little array of stuff. With every machine and when they were deployed and whatnot. And then I can start to use PowerShell to find out additional information about these, do validations, making sure that every sequence that was deployed has at least 4 actions that I define to be considered a successful sequence. Stuff that is super hard to do in SQL, at least for me, but I found it way easier to do it in PowerShell. So basically looking at the same data differently, but using logic, it's good stuff. That concept. Questions, comments?
Awesome. I was gonna say one stat that we looked at on clients lately, because I work for a company that has people that use a lot of computers, is how many profiles are on a computer.
Yeah.
We found that if you have like 180 profiles on a computer, that it's really hard for Windows to get a major update.
Yeah, I mean, I would say not even before hitting that limit. I mean, me and Michael, we have a session on MMS. How many are going to MMS, by the way, here? Yeah, all right. We have a session on basically best practices for Windows 11 imaging. And one of those items is indeed profiles. Because if you have a machine that has 22 profiles, because it's been in use for 5 years by 22 different people, or roaming people, 2 profiles might be active. And it's a very different story for setup to try to upgrade 2 profiles versus 22 profiles. That's when you start to see these upgrades that take like 2.5 hours instead of half an hour or an hour. So get rid of junk. That's a good, or report at least on junk. So you know what you have.
Yeah. Try the computer at gate D4 at CTAC.
Will do my best.
Not 100 profiles. So, yeah.
I maybe think airport security might be a little bit upset if I walk over the USB stick. Excuse me. That's an upgrade here real quick.
Yeah, and we have a chat from Gary Block. Gary said during in-place upgrades, we would clear old profiles and any profiles that belong to service, so like a service account.
Or service desk.
Or service desk, sorry.
No, it's brilliant. And
Yeah.
speaking of Gary, since we have him on the call apparently, hi Gary, by the way. He has over the years released a lot of good stuff around that topic. If I can find my software library, I'll show you to it. Also, you need to jump to the right ConfigMgr. Here, Garytown, that's his blog. This is one of his older exports, but they still have, I will show you the link. It's easier. So this is a sequence collection that you can download that has tons of ready-made examples for useful things during, in this case, in-place upgrades. And it's been downloaded a few times. 20-some thousand. But in here are many sequences that are not supposed to be run as sequences. They're there to be, so I call it inspiration. But for example, here is a cleanup sequence that has cleanup actions where you maybe, I like that one, I like that one, and that one. And you can just copy and paste that to your stuff. Because when we do imaging training or host deployment training, I still do those. Still happening around the world. One of the key things to make imaging or upgrades working is to get rid of junk. I think one of these to use updated images, but get rid of junk is a good start. And here is a good example on getting rid of junk. And of course, you can do group policies. There are, if you God forbid, using roaming profiles, there are policies you can set to automatically delete roaming profiles that has been touched in the next, I don't know, 60 days and whatnot. But yeah, good stuff, sure. Any other questions? Have a whooping 6 minutes to spare, I believe.
Kind of curious about your client collection there. How are you collecting those CSVs, particularly if they're like on the internet? Or is this just strictly
So,
lab?
I have two techniques. So the question is, how do I collect the CSV file? I have two techniques that I use. For smaller customers, it's just a whack-away file share. For larger environments, we do bits upload. Because bits upload is more nice to internal firewalls and to the server itself. So when you start to hit 100,000 clients, give or take, and you have them all reach out daily to a file server to upload a CSV file, there's a lot of stuff going on. But we found that bits upload, the server don't even flinch for the same number of uploads. And in your web servers, I think I have an example here, because we use that for cloud imaging stuff. So we upload all the log files to that. We will just have one or more bits uploads capabilities, because you can require authentication. It can be HTTPS, it can be username, password, certificates, and all that stuff. So we allow uploads to this folder specifically. So it's a virtual directory to which you upload log files. But you can do the same thing for ConfigMgr. Fairly easy. So you just replace your copy item with the start bits transfer instead with the upload. If you want to, you can put in some done that a few times where we also track the uploads and whether they were successful or not and report on that. But basically, it's quite easy to troubleshoot because if the file didn't show in the folder, it wasn't uploaded. It's easy to see. Yeah, good question. And there are other services you can use to get files. Common Health Solution is Anders Rutland's solution. He was here in this group 2 years ago as well, presenting on his client health stuff. He has a web service that you can put on Azure, what's that called? Web proxy thing. So you can connect to that and upload the log file that way, then put them in the database and have Azure functions, and it's a good idea. There's a lot of stuff you can do. Doesn't have to have all the clients on the network. There are organizations now who every single client is internet only. Right. Kind of hard to reach a file server than a regular file server. But the web server, easy. The other questions?